Howdy, folks. There's a particular argument that is sometimes used to try to refute the idea of purgatory. This argument proceeds from a particular passage of St. Paul, and it's said that St. Paul says that to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. So if you are absent from the body, if you've died, then you're instantaneously, automatically present with the Lord, and that would leave no room for a place like purgatory. Now, this is a very popular claim. If you Google the words absent from the body is to be present with the Lord, you'll find nearly 10 million hits. If you put quotation marks around it to search for the exact phrase, you'll find more than 200,000 hits. So there's quite a lot of people out there who are making this claim. But does it really work? Well, it turns out that the whole thing is based on a misquotation. If you look at what St. Paul actually says in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 6 through 9, he says, "So we are always of good courage. We know that while we are at home in the body, we are away from the Lord, for we walk by faith, not by sight. We are of good courage, and we would rather be away from the body and at home with the Lord. So, whether we are at home or away, we make it our aim to please Him." As you can see, St. Paul doesn't say to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. What he says is that we would rather be absent from the body and at home with the Lord. In fact, he speaks of two homes in this passage. First, he speaks of being at home in the body, and then he speaks of being at home with the Lord. Now, if you think about the situation that some people find themselves in, it can help clarify this. Some people have more than one home. In particular, some people, for example, are forced to be away from their families for work reasons. So suppose that I'm one of those people. Suppose that in order to find work, I've had to move to New York City, where I live in a grubby little apartment. And my family, meanwhile, let's suppose, is back in sunny Southern California. Well, I might say, I would rather be absent from New York and at home with my family in Southern California. But that doesn't mean that to be absent from New York is to automatically or instantaneously be at home with my family in Southern California. In fact, if I want to go see my family, I'm going to have to travel in order to get there. I'm going to have to cross the entire United States. In the same way, we can see how saying that we would rather be away from the body and the struggles of this life and be present with the Lord in heaven doesn't mean that to be away from this life means that you're instantaneously in heaven and that there's no journey of any kind involved. In fact, in Luke's Gospel, in the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, Jesus depicts Lazarus as being carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom, which at least depicts some kind of journey. Now, if this passage in 2 Corinthians doesn't disprove the existence of purgatory, what evidence do we have for it? Well, ironically, one of the passages that the Catholic Church most often cites with regard to purgatory is also found in St. Paul's letters to the Corinthians. It's in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 12 to 15. In his 2007 encyclical Spe Salvi, Pope Benedict XVI comments on this passage, and he notes, "Paul begins by saying that Christian life is built upon a common foundation, Jesus Christ. This foundation endures. If we have stood firm on this foundation and built our life upon it, we know that it cannot be taken away from us even in death." Then Paul continues, "Now, if anyone builds on the foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, straw, each man's work will become manifest, for the day will disclose it, because it will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test what sort of work each one has done. If the work which any man has built on the foundation survives, he will receive a reward. If any man's work is burned up, he will suffer loss, though he himself will be saved, but only as through fire. In this text, it is in any case evident that our salvation can take different forms, that some of what is built may be burned down. In order to be saved, we personally have to pass through fire so as to become fully open to receiving God and able to take our place at the table of the eternal marriage feast. So we see that there is indeed biblical foundation for saying that there is a purification after death that believers can experience even though their salvation is secure. That's the doctrine of purgatory, and it's right there in St. Paul's letters to the Corinthians. Now, I'd like to point out another aspect of the argument based on 2 Corinthians 5. It's the idea that if we were to instantaneously be in heaven upon our departure from this life, that there would be no space for purgatory. Is that really true? Well, if you look elsewhere in St. Paul's letters to the Corinthians once again, you find something very interesting. In 1 Corinthians 15, verses 51 to 52, St. Paul says, "Lo, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed." This indicates that God can transform us instantaneously, in the twinkling of an eye. And if that's the case at the end of the world, then could he do the same thing at the time of our deaths? In other words, does purgatory have to take a measurable space of time, or could it work some other way? Well, back in 1977, Joseph Ratzinger, then a theology professor, wrote a book on eschatology, the doctrine of the last things, including death, judgment, hell, and heaven. And in this book, he commented on the doctrine of purgatory, and he said, "The transforming moment of this encounter cannot be quantified by the measurements of earthly time. It is indeed not eternal, but a transition, and yet trying to qualify it as of short or long duration on the basis of temporal measurements derived from physics would be naive and unproductive." He goes on in the same passage to describe purgatory as taking an existential time rather than a measurable amount of time as we experience it. Then, 30 years later, in 2007, now as Pope Benedict XVI, he wrote in his encyclical Spe Salvi and proposed the same thing. He said, "It is clear that we cannot calculate the duration of this transforming burning in terms of the chronological measurements of this world. The transforming moment of this encounter eludes earthly time reckoning. It is the heart's time." We see that Catholic theology doesn't presuppose that purgatory takes any measurable amount of time. It can be understood as a transforming encounter with the glorified Christ that burns away all of our impurities and makes us ready for the eternal glory of heaven.